Today is Tuesday, November 25th, and it is one of the bleakest mornings Sean Diddy Combs has ever stepped into. The city outside is still dark, the skyline wrapped in a dull, early winter haze, but inside the federal system, the storm has already begun. Long before Manhattan opens its eyes, SDNY's hallways glow with harsh fluorescent light, files being dropped onto desks, boots echoing down corridors, and supervisors whispering in clipped, urgent tones. Something has detonated overnight, something no one was prepared for. At Fort Dix, officers on the night shift stand in small clusters, exchanging looks of disbelief. Their faces are tight, their posture tense, as if they've stumbled into a situation far beyond ordinary contraband or inmate misconduct. The energy in the block feels wrong, heavy, unsettling. Even the most seasoned guards can sense when a prison is holding its breath, and this morning the air is thick with it. Because just a few hours earlier, late Monday night, November 24th, at 11:47 p.m., a video surfaced online. Not speculation, not another rumor, not recycled footage. A real, uncut, unfiltered clip recorded from somewhere deep inside the prison. It appeared quietly, almost anonymously, posted from an account so small it barely had a pulse. But the moment the video went live, the chain reaction began. Within minutes, federal monitoring software picked it up. Within minutes after that, analysts froze mid-scroll. And within an hour, the U.S. Attorney's Office was awake, alert, and scrambling. The footage wasn't just surprising, it was impossible. It contained details no outsider should know, angles no visitor could capture, audio no guard would ever release, the kind of footage that only comes from the inside, the kind of footage that signals a breach not just of rules, but of the federal system itself. Before we go deeper into this unfolding crisis, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because what's unfolding this morning is unlike anything we've seen in this case, and every new minute is rewriting Diddy's future. Now back to what happened after the video dropped. Inside Fort Dix, the moment the emergency notification reached the supervising officer, the block changed. Guards abandoned their routine pacing. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. One officer later wrote in his report that it felt like the temperature shifted without the thermostat moving. Another described a sensation he couldn't explain, like the building itself knew something catastrophic was coming. At 12:03 a.m., the video was flagged as high priority. At 12:11 a.m., analysts compared the audio with sealed testimony. At 12:29 a.m., they pulled up the timestamp embedded in the frame. And at 12:52 a.m., the panic began spreading beyond the office. Because what they saw in those 17 seconds didn't just raise questions, it dropped answers. Answers prosecutors had been chasing since the trial. Answers witnesses hinted at, but couldn't prove. Answers tied directly to nights when alcohol violations had already put Diddy on the edge of disaster. The public only saw a blurry, shaky clip, but the version inside SDNY was cleaner, sharper, enhanced. And once they enhanced it, there was no going back. At 1:32 a.m., an encrypted alert hit Judge Aaron Subramanian's phone. He read it, paused, read it again, then made a decision without hesitation. Bring him in at first light. 3 words that changed everything. Those words triggered the kind of mobilization that only happens when the government believes something explosive has entered its evidence chain. By 2:10 a.m., high-risk marshals were gathered in the transport wing. By 2:23 a.m., Fort Dix was instructed to prepare inmate Combs for immediate extraction, and by 3:02 a.m., SDNY was operating like the middle of a workday, lights on, security heightened, clerks logging every movement. Meanwhile, the internet was waking up differently. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., the clip exploded across platforms. TikTok edits, Twitter storms, Instagram breakdowns, YouTubers going live at ridiculous hours, celebrities messaging journalists privately. What is this? Is the video real? Where did this come from? But none of them knew what the federal government already understood. The video was real, the audio was real, and the implications were devastating. Inside Fort Dix, the shift in atmosphere worsened. The officers moving toward Diddy's cell didn't speak. Their footsteps were too loud in a hallway that felt too quiet. Even inmates sensing the change stayed behind their doors, whispering instead of shouting, listening instead of provoking. It wasn't fear of Diddy, it was fear of what the system was about to do. One officer later described the moment they reached his door. It felt like everything behind that door had already ended. At 4:09 a.m., three marshals entered the block the same moment the entire prison went silent. Not guards, not supervisors, marshals. And marshals only appear when the situation has crossed into territory far beyond standard discipline. They didn't exchange a single unnecessary word. They simply stopped at the cell. One turned to a Fort Dix officer and spoke quietly. "He needs to be ready. We're leaving before sunrise." Those words hit harder than any alarm could. Because whatever Diddy believed his sentence was before this night, whatever he thought he still had, whatever hope he held on to, none of it was real anymore. The marshals didn't wait. They didn't ask questions. Protocol shifted from disciplinary to extraction, which only happens when the court considers immediate escalated sentencing. By 5:40 a.m., the entire block felt like it was collapsing under its own tension. And by 5:11 a.m., with the sky still dark, with the world still asleep, with the viral video still spreading like wildfire, Diddy was escorted out of Fort Dix, chains secured, head lowered, and no indication he would ever return to that cell again. Not today, not this week. And if SDNY was right, maybe not ever. The transport van had barely cleared the Fort Dix perimeter when the real war began inside the federal building in Manhattan. While the world outside continued sleeping under a cold November sky, the sealed evidence room on the 9th floor of SDNY was alive with tension. Prosecutors, analysts, and federal staff crowded around a large monitor, their eyes fixed on the same 17-second clip that had detonated the system overnight. No one said anything at first. They just watched, then watched again, and again. With each replay, the room grew colder. The first time they focused on the angle, how the camera tilted, where it seemed to be placed, how the lighting didn't match any visitor-accessible point in the facility. Someone whispered, "That's impossible to film from the outside." Another responded, "Exactly." The second viewing exposed movement, a shadow sliding across the edge of the frame. Too smooth, too close, too deliberate. A federal agent leaned forward, squinting. "That's him," she muttered. "That's Combs." The third playback was worse. With the volume raised, distortion filtered, and background noise isolated, a faint voice emerged, low, hurried, and unmistakably real. One sentence, a sentence that matched a line buried deep in a sealed deposition a witness gave months ago. A line Diddy's legal team mocked, dismissed, tore apart in front of the jury. Now it was on tape. And this time, it wasn't coming from a witness stand. It was coming from inside a federal prison. A prosecutor pressed pause. "We need to check the timestamp," he said, though his voice trembled. When they zoomed into the corner of the screen, the room fell unnaturally silent. Tuesday wasn't the first time federal officials had to deal with Diddy's misconduct, but the timestamp connected the video to something far older, something the team had quietly suspected but could never prove. The night alcohol was first discovered in his possession earlier in the month. The date on the frame aligned perfectly with the pattern officers described in their reports. Late-night movements, unexplained interactions, strange smells drifting through the corridor. The alcohol incident wasn't random. It wasn't an isolated lapse. It was never a slip. It was the beginning of something bigger. One federal agent exhaled sharply. "So the violations weren't mistakes, they were part of the setup?" Another replied without looking away from the screen. "Looks like it." Cases rarely come together this neatly, not with someone this high profile, not with a defendant who had already survived a trial that nearly tore the music industry apart. But this morning, inside that dimly lit room, the prosecutors weren't building a narrative. The narrative was landing in front of them, uninvited. One of the senior attorneys stepped back from the screen. "If this video is authenticated," he said, "he's finished." Authentication was the next step, and it didn't take long. The enhanced version of the clip was processed through software Diddy's defense team never had access to. The video wasn't tampered. The audio wasn't inserted. No manipulation, no splicing, No digital artifacts signaling edits. Worse, the background hum matched the specific ventilation frequency of Block C at Fort Dix. That alone was enough to certify location. Then came the part everyone feared. A second figure appeared in the reflection from a metallic surface in the back of the frame. Faint, blurred, almost ghost-like, but enough for the analyst to isolate facial contours. After contrast adjustments and frame reconstruction, the outline matched an inmate who had been interviewed during the earlier investigation, but whose statements had been dismissed for lack of supporting evidence. That evidence was now staring at them. What the public saw online was the shaky, low-resolution version. What the federal team saw was something far more dangerous. Context. Context that linked the alcohol violation reports with the movements in the hallway. Context that aligned with the witness depositions from the trial. Context that breathed new life into allegations prosecutors tried and failed to connect months ago. In the corner of the room, a junior analyst whispered, "It's all there, everything we needed." Another agent replied quietly, "This isn't a correctional violation anymore. This is a calculated breach." As the realization settled, the tone of the room changed. The prosecutors weren't just watching a video. They were witnessing the collapse of every defense argument the legal team had fought for. The video didn't just implicate Diddy, it discredited half of his sworn statements. One analyst scrolled through older surveillance logs and froze when he found a match. Footsteps, timing, cell activity, the behavior pattern leading up to the first alcohol incident fit almost perfectly with what the video showed. The alcohol was the smoke, the video was the fire, and the system now understood that both came from the same source. At 6 a.m., the courthouse shifted from analysis to action. Phone calls, encrypted messages, rapid briefings, division heads waking up judges, security teams adjusting protocols. Everything was moving toward one inevitable outcome. One prosecutor slammed his folder shut. "We have to recommend the maximum," he said. "There's no room for leniency. Not after this." A supervisor nodded. "The judge won't hesitate." He warned him. Twice. Warned him during sentencing in October. Warned him again through disciplinary reports. Warned him through behavior reviews. Warnings only work when the inmate listens. Sean Combs did not. By 6:41 a.m., the courthouse was sealed. Elevators restricted, doors locked, security tripled, a private courtroom prepared behind reinforced glass. Inside that courtroom, the judge's bench waited under dim lighting, a thick file resting quietly on the wood. The enhanced video, the transcript, the timestamp analysis, and a fresh emergency recommendation stamped with a single word: irreversible. Meanwhile, in the basement transfer area, marshals checked restraints, adjusted gear, and prepared for the arrival of a man who, only 48 hours earlier, believed he was serving a manageable sentence. He didn't know that every second of that viral video had already wiped away whatever future he thought he still had. He didn't know that the alcohol incidents, the ones he brushed off, the ones he thought he could outrun, were now reclassified as early warning signs. He didn't know the federal system wasn't questioning him anymore. They were done questioning. By the time the van rolled to a stop outside the courthouse at 6:52 a.m., the decision had already been made in every room except one, the courtroom where the judge would say it out loud. Above ground, Manhattan was still waking up. Down here, inside cold concrete walls, Sean Combs was being escorted toward the final truth he could not escape. And the deeper you go into this morning, the clearer one thing becomes. The alcohol was never the story. It was the first crack. The viral video was the break, and what comes next will be the fall. The van rolled into the underground loading bay beneath SDNY just as the first hints of morning light touched the Manhattan skyline. The city above was still groggy, half asleep, unaware that one of the most decisive mornings in Sean Diddy Combs' life was unfolding 30 feet below their feet. The engine hummed for a moment before shutting off, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence. Inside the vehicle, Diddy did not move. His head was down, his breathing shallow, the weight of everything that had happened since midnight pressing onto him like a slab of concrete. A marshal opened the back door with a heavy clank. The cold air rushed inside, brushing against Diddy's face. He blinked, barely lifting his gaze. He looked like a man trying to brace himself for a blow he already knew was coming. "Let's go," a marshal said quietly, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone who understands the gravity of what's about to happen. The chains around Diddy's wrists rattled as he stepped out. His shoes hit the concrete floor softly, but in the empty loading bay, the sound echoed like a warning. Two marshals walked ahead of him, two behind. They didn't rush him. They didn't drag him. They didn't speak. They simply escorted him through a long, narrow hallway where every footstep felt heavier than the last. The courthouse above was sealed tight. Only essential personnel were allowed inside. No reporters, no spectators, no curious onlookers. Every elevator was locked except the single car reserved solely for this transport. When its doors opened with a cold metallic slide, Diddy stepped inside, and the marshals surrounded him. One pressed the button for the 7th floor, and for a few seconds the elevator hummed quietly as it began to rise. Those seconds were enough time for memories to flicker across his mind. Trial days filled with cameras, witnesses, crowds, noise. A courtroom buzzing with tension. The moment the verdict landed, the sentencing a month later that he told himself he could survive. But this morning wasn't like those days. Today the silence was louder. Today the consequences were final. The elevator stopped. The doors opened slowly, revealing a dim hallway lit by a line of overhead lights that buzzed faintly. Marshals led him through it, past heavy doors and reinforced glass, until they reached the last door at the end. The private courtroom, the one reserved for cases so sensitive the public never hears them live, only after the damage is done. When the door opened, the room inside felt colder than the hallway. The lights were low, the judge's bench looming like a shadowed monument at the front. The walls were bare, the air still, the silence thick enough to grip. Only 3 people sat inside. Judge Aaron Subramanian, the prosecutor standing beside a stack of files, and a court clerk with his eyes glued to the papers in front of him. They did not look up when Diddy entered. The marshals guided him to the defendant's table. He sat slowly, his chains settling against the wood with a faint metallic tap. He didn't rest back into the chair. He leaned forward slightly, shoulders tight, his breathing uneven. For a moment, the room stood frozen, time stretching thin around him. Then the judge lifted his eyes. "Mr. Combs," he began, his voice calm but edged with something colder than disappointment. "This hearing concerns the evidence that surfaced overnight." Diddy did not speak. The judge opened the file in front of him and flipped to the first page. The sound paper sliding against paper echoed louder than any voice had so far. "The court has thoroughly reviewed the footage, the audio analysis, the time-stamp reconstruction, and the accompanying reports prepared by the U.S. Attorney's Office." The prosecutor took a step forward. "Your Honor, the government has also verified that the video was recorded inside Fort Dix, consistent with the facility's internal audio patterns and lighting signatures." The judge nodded slightly but didn't look away from Diddy. "The evidence contradicts multiple statements made by you during your sentencing hearing. It also reveals behavior that goes far beyond disciplinary issues." A marshal behind Diddy shifted, tightening his stance. The judge continued, flipping another page. "The alcohol violations alone were severe. They demonstrated risk, instability, and disregard for federal regulations. But this video," he paused, not for effect, but because he truly seemed to choose his next words carefully. "This video demonstrates intent. Intent, the one word that can destroy any chance of leniency in federal court." Diddy's eyes flickered for the first time, a small movement, barely visible but noticeable enough for the prosecutor to glance at him. "The pattern is clear," the judge said, his voice deepening. "Warnings were given. Opportunities to comply were offered. You failed each one." The prosecutor added, "Your Honor, the government believes Mr. Combs poses a significant risk to the integrity of federal operations and requires immediate reclassification." The judge closed the file. Soft, final, absolute. "Mr. Combs," he said, leaning forward slightly, "the court finds that continued standard sentencing is no longer appropriate for you." Diddy's fingers tightened around the chains. His breath hitched once. "Based on your escalating behavior," the judge continued, "the contradictions in your statements, and the contents of the viral prison footage, He inhaled once, exhaled once, and delivered the blow. Your sentence is hereby upgraded to life imprisonment. The room felt like it froze mid-breath. Without the possibility of parole, the words hung in the air like a verdict carved in iron. Diddy blinked once, twice, his lips parting briefly but no sound coming out. His eyes didn't fill with anger or tears, they simply emptied. Hollow, silent. A man watching the last window of his life close shut. The judge stood. The hearing is concluded. Everything after that unfolded mechanically. Marshals closed in. One secured his left arm. Another tightened the restraints. A third stepped closer than before, anticipating instability. Diddy stood slowly, but his knees buckled for a fraction of a second, enough for two marshals to catch him. His chains dragged softly across the polished floor, each metallic scrape echoing through the courtroom louder than any argument, louder than any testimony, louder than the judge's final words. He didn't look back. The door closed behind him with a heavy echoing thud. Down the hallway, every marshal he passed stood a little straighter. The elevator ride felt longer this time, the weight of everything hanging around him like the cold steel on his wrists. When he stepped out into the loading bay again, the morning light was finally creeping into Manhattan, a pale, washed-out blue. The world above had no idea that one of the most powerful figures in entertainment had just watched his entire future collapse in a silent federal courtroom. The van door opened. Diddy climbed inside without resistance. The door shut. Lock engaged. Engines revved. And as the vehicle pulled away into the early morning fog, one question echoed quietly through SDNY's halls, a question no judge, prosecutor, or investigator had been able to shake since the video surfaced. If that one clip leaked, what else exists out there? And if it surfaces, what will it reveal next? Before you go, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because this story is unraveling faster than anyone expected, and I'll bring you every update the moment it breaks.